So in our discussion of price ceiling, I'm going to combine this a little bit with the second half of chapter 4. I'll also, put some videos that are specific to chapter 4 in our playlist, and I'll link them in an announcement to everybody. But just to save time, I'm going to kind of combine our price ceiling and our financial market example into one. So when we're talking about financial markets, right? So in all of these certain things, we've had some kind of price over here. So we always have quantity right here. That doesn't change. But we had price of the good before. We had price of an hour of your time, right, which is a wage. It's the price of an hour of your time. And now we're going to talk about the price of borrowing money. The price of borrowing money, which is also called an interest rate. And so when we're talking about financial markets, again, we have to kind of, redefine our associations, right? So we are normally on the demand side of the situation, but this time we're actually going to be on the supply side. So when we're talking here, we're talking about the savings. So supply here is really the savings of everyday households. You, me, firms, right? Your parents, so on and so forth. And then when we're talking about demand, and we're talking about financial markets, right? We're talking about the borrowing. So when you're using a credit card, or when you're financing a new home or a new car or a new boat, or even a cell phone these days, right? We finance our cell phones to purchase them sometimes. So we would demand, we would borrow some money in order to finance that. And where these two things meet is in interest rate. So some sort of interest rate, I star. And let's say, just for our example here, we'll say it's something like 15%. And so at the equilibrium, the interest rate, or the price for this market, is 15%. And let's say that the equilibrium capital that's being loaned and borrowed is something like 600 billion.
It's a really high interest rate.
It's a very high interest rate. I'm just keeping with what the book says. Interest rates are abnormally high, but they're not nowhere near that high, right? I think they're at like 7% right now.
7.3.
Yeah. So that leads us to, the government usually doesn't allow companies to charge this high of interest rate, right? We have laws in terms of, we have usury laws, right, which determine an upper limit on interest rate that lenders can charge. So let's get that in our notes here. Usury laws, which I don't know what the root of that is for. It reminds me of like Ursa Minor. Like, were bears involved in this at some point? I don't know. So usury laws are laws that impose an upper limit. So remember, in the minimum wage, we had a lower limit, right? Now we have an upper limit on the interest rate that lenders can charge. And so the government comes in and says, nah, you cannot charge more than 10%. So what does this do? Well, the government's imposition of this price ceiling in the form of a usury law is going to stymie the savings. At 10%, we're only going to get $400 billion saved that's available to be borrowed. But at 10%, we're going to get 800 billion that's demanded by our consumers at this lower interest rate. And so this is what's called a shortage or excessive demand. And again, just like we did when we were talking about price floors, what if this 10% was actually 20%? So what if the government said the upper limit that you can charge for interest is 20% when this is the market condition and the equilibrium interest is 15%? Nothing's going to happen. So in order for a price ceiling to have an effect, it has to be below the equilibrium. And again, a price ceiling, when drawn correctly, should be the ceiling of a house, right? You can go ahead and draw a little window, draw a nice little roof, right? So a ceiling of a house when it's drawn correctly. So the price floor needs to look like a floor that you could have a dance party on, and a price ceiling needs to look like the ceiling of a house that you could draw on the graph. Questions on price ceilings, price floors, labor markets, and financial markets? Awesome.